Let me just start by saying Hmt Ntrt, Sawek tu Hmt Ntrt, Audu Auma Kazi Paharu. Give yourself to Ntrw daily, keep yourself for Ntrw daily, and do it tomorrow as you do it today. And that's actually, I'm just realizing how much of a fitting prayer that is for this conversation in this course that we're about to embark upon because a guide to the 7 days is really meant to help us do that work, like keeping ourselves for Ntrw daily and like understanding what that's going to look like. So let's dive into our conversation tonight. Oops. I want to just start by as I started in the first orientation, I want to start in tonight's conversation by giving homage to our ancestor Baba Haruankra Samaj Se Pata, because again, I think it's important for us to acknowledge our teachers and our forefathers and foremothers, and for me and for many people, the practice of thinking about the energies of the day came from him. And so I do want to just speak his name aloud, keep his energy alive, and give him his flowers, give credit where credit is due. I think it's important to begin with that. Um, Fast forward a little bit to, I learned, about the days of the week from Baba. I learned about it through my Kemetic studies and Kemetic travels over the years. And a few years ago, I was speaking with some sisters in the Temple of Anu who had a lot of questions about this practice. There are over 400 Ntrw in the Kemetic tradition. And we tend to talk centrally about just a few of them over and over and over again. And so some of us have really strong relationships with one or two Ntrw or a few Ntrw here or there, but we don't really know enough about many of the Ntrw, and that even goes for the Ntrw that govern the days of the week. So the sisters had come to me and they said, like, how am I supposed to get to know more about these other Ntrw, that govern these days? Like we know that Kansu is a Netter of Monday, but I don't understand who Kansu is, and I don't understand why Kansu is associated with Monday. So how am I supposed to invoke Kansu? How am I supposed to align myself with Kansu's energy when I don't even understand or know enough about who Kansu is, right? And another one of the questions that came was about, like, how else am I supposed to use that, right? Like, let's say I do understand who Kansu is and I do understand more about his energy. Other than wearing Kansu's color, like, how else am I supposed to implement this practice? Like, what else am I supposed to do with this? And sometimes I think in spiritual practice, we take for granted that people know, and so we talk about things with like this broad, generalization, because we think everybody knows or we think everybody understands. And then when new people come in, we're still kind of talking about it from a perspective of people who have been doing it for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. And we never kind of go back to the beginning. We never go back to the basics. And so then when beginners come in and new people come in, they need the basics. They need they need the foundation. And we gloss over it, or we assume that everybody understands it really quickly or really easily without ever diving deeper into the conversation. And so when they brought these concerns to me, I realized that this was an opportunity for us to revisit this practice, which I consider to be a really important part of our cultural practice, right? Thinking about what it means to understand the vibrations of the day that you're in, understanding the planetary associations, understanding the Ntrw associations, understanding all of the other correspondences that go along with that, and then aligning yourself with that vibration so that you are spiritually, magically, and ritually in a position to make your life happen in alignment with your divine will, right? How do you harness your will? How do you manifest your will? How do you co-create in concert with the Ntrw? And we can't we can't just say like, oh, you're a co-creator without properly equipping you with the tools to actually participate in the co-creation process. And so this conversation, the Guide to the 7 Days, is meant to help us to make sure we better understand the tools, better understand the work that is necessary to be co-creators, and put us in a stronger position to be able to activate our spiritual powers, to activate our ritual magic, and to activate the power that exists between in our sacred relationship with the Ntrw. I think it's important to acknowledge that our ancestors understood that there were heavenly bodies in the cosmos. They understood the concept of astrology, right? Not arguing that they called it astrology or that they practiced astrology the way that we think about astrology in 2026, but they understood that everything in nature is Netzer, and therefore everything that is Netzer is interconnected with one another, right? They absolutely did understand. And we know that they understood this because they assigned the planets and the heavenly bodies divine attributes. They saw them as Ntrw. They saw their movements as sacred movements. We just finished celebrating Weprin Pet, and Weprin Pet is the acknowledgement of the rising of the star Spadet, right? It is the acknowledgement of a cosmic movement in the heavens that impacts what happens on Earth and impacts how the people of ancient Kemet moved and lived and survived culturally, right? Spiritually, financially, right? And so they know that their relationship was as above so below, right? They understood that they were not like what happened on earth was not a silo separate from what happened in the heavens. They knew that what happened in the heavens impacted what happened on earth. They looked to the heavens, right? They studied the heavens. They divinized the heavens, and they divinized the planetary bodies, the cosmic bodies that moved in the heavens. They understood the relationships that happened between them, and they understood that there was an impact that those bodies had on what happened in their own lives. Okay. So I think that's important. Sometimes people will say that, like, they'll talk about astrology as though it is not an African practice or an ancient practice. And I think that that is really short sighted. Again, while our ancestors may not have considered astrology with the exact same terminology or perspective that we have now, they had a perspective on the cosmic bodies. They had a perspective that was both practical, like a practical understanding and awareness, and also a spiritual understanding and awareness. Again, there's nothing that our ancestors interacted with that they did not consider to be spiritual, right? Everything is Netter, right? And if everything is Netter, then everything is divine, everything is spiritual. And I think it's important that we consider um, that as an essential perspective when it comes to how we approach our own practice. What we do know about modern astrology tends to come out of the Greco-Roman age, and it's what many people will refer to as Hellenistic astrology. And in Hellenistic astrology, what you find is the recognition that every single day of the week opens with a planet that is the rising planet, that is the opener of the day, right? And so that opening energy, the planet that opens the day, is the planet that governs the day. So for context around like where does this even come from? This idea that every single day has a different energy, it comes from this understanding that every single day during the first hour of the day, there is a ruling planet, and that planet is said to be the energy that governs the day. And so if you want to know more about planetary hours, you can go to planetaryhours.net and get really, really deep into the weeds about that. We're not going to talk about that here, but I did think it was important to give us that foundation of understanding that like these associations is not random, like randomly deciding that the moon is associated with Monday. This has to do with astronomical studies that show us which planet is regent during this first hour of the day. And similarly to how your rising sign is the sign that like your energy rises or opens to, the rising planet is the energy that the day rises or opens to. And that is the energy that, like, whatever energy the day opens to is the energy that kind of carries with us throughout the course of the day, right? I think the other thing that's important to acknowledge here is that day in the ancient world begins at sunrise and not at midnight. And I think that's important because that changes the way that we think about about a lot of things. You know, the first time that I made this realization was when I was looking up my Akan name. Actually, in the Akan culture, they have a set of names that are based on the days of the week. And originally, I thought that my Akan name was associated with Thursday, um, because based on the Gregorian calendar system, I was born on a Thursday. January 6th was a Thursday in 1983. But upon further exploration, I realized that I was born overnight. I was born, and so because I was born overnight, even though technically I guess it was Thursday morning, right? It was, according to ancient people or according to people who follow the cycles of the natural world, I was actually born on Wednesday, right? Because Thursday had not yet dawned. Thursday had not yet started. And so technically speaking, if I were to take an account name, it should be the Wednesday name, right? And not the Thursday name. And when I made that realization, that's when that for me opened up the idea that like that as we think about the cycles, in what ways are we aligning ourselves with cycles that are based off of the way that we like live, the way that we have to live due to the culture that we're in, due to the structure of the society that we exist in, and in what ways are we thinking about cycles in terms of the natural cycles, in terms of sunrise and sunset, and the ways that plants bloom and close and things like that, the ways that roosters crow, and the ways that animals respond to nature and things like that. And in what ways are we aligning ourselves with the natural cycles, and moving similarly where and when we can? Because again, thinking about this practice, again, in terms of alignment, if we really want to be aligned with the divine energies, we really want to strive as much as possible to think about how the natural energies move, um, without prompting, right? Like they move, roosters crow because it's time to crow, right? They don't have alarm clocks. Nobody tells them to. It is in their nature. It is intuitive. It is instinctive, right? So how are we following those natural rhythms? How are we living in alignment with that? How are we living in flow or in Maat, in harmony with these natural rhythms, right? And versus, the ways that the Western world tries to make us and force us to make things fit. Um, there are going to be some times where we kind of have to do that because we do live in this Western society, but there are other times where it is important for us to find the flow and find the harmony, and to sit and exist within that. And so I do think it's important for us to consider that context, and think about how that shifts some of our magical practice, some of our ritual practice, and how we think about our spiritual work. So let's talk about the name of the days in the Gregorian calendar. The name of the days come from a combination of the Germanic and Romantic languages. Um, so I've included both of them because I feel like it's important context, right? English is, of course, a Germanic language. For those of you who are linguists or who study language, you know that English is a Germanic language. And so you'll see more of a combination, or more immediate connection to the Germanic language. But there is also still a connection to the Romantic language the Romantic languages, in particular Latin. And why the Latin is important is because the Latin gives us a direct correlation to the planets. You'll notice that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in Old English don't mention the planets anymore. Those days of the week actually mention the Norse gods, all right, that are associated with those days. And why that's important is because it gives us a clue into a little bit of why it is certain Ntrw are aligned to certain days. Because we can ask the question of like, what Netzer do we associate with Tuesday, and what god did the Norse people associate with Tuesday, and are there similarities in these vibrations and in these understandings and in these attributes, right? How exactly is Mantu, for example, similar to the Norse god Tyr? What attributes do they share? What attributes are different? And why might both of these energies be aligned with Mars, right? And so when you think about, again, like where did this practice come from and how did we make these associations? We are thinking about the planets and the energies of the planets, the attributes of the planets or the planetary bodies for each day. And then we also can take clues from some of the associations that have already been made. Tuesday being associated with Tyr, Wednesday being associated with Odin, Thursday being associated with Thor, and Friday being associated with Frigg. We can take some clues from those associations as well. The clues that we're getting from those associations point us back to magical correspondence. Magical correspondence is essentially a law that predicates itself on the understanding that Netter is everything you can perceive and everything that you cannot perceive. And therefore, if Netter is everything, then that means everything in creation has a spiritual fingerprint. It has a wavelength and a vibration. And so when you get ready to use something for spiritual purposes, the best way for you to maximize its power and to maximize its application in your ritual work, in your magical work, in your spiritual work, is to understand its fingerprint and to understand its vibration so that you use it in the best way, right? And taking that another step further, magical correspondence also dictates to us that it's important for us to consider how these vibrational signatures align one to another. Again, thinking about thinking about cross cultures, thinking about cross systems, right? How do these things align? How does Mars align to fire, to Mantu, to cinnamon, to orange, right? What is the correspondence there? What is the thing that ties all of those things together or that cause them to have a magical vibration or a spiritual fingerprint that is so closely aligned that they work so well together, that they correspond together, that they align in a way that makes sense so that, again, when you are applying them in ritual work, simultaneously, you are constantly boosting and improving and empowering and supercharging the work that you're doing because you're bringing together all these elements that are like harmonious with one another, that all intentionally work well together and are intentionally can be directed to the same goal or similar goals. And can be directed into intentional and focused spiritual work. Okay. One way that we see correspondence in action is by talking about the vibrations of colors. Every single color has a different spiritual vibration, a different spiritual fingerprint. And we know that every Ntrw has a color that is aligned or associated with it. But we know there's only but so many colors, right? So at some point or another, where we land, right, is the realization that these colors repeat. right? There are going to be several Ntrw that align with red. There are going to be several Ntrw that align with blue. So in order to understand why a certain Netr or Ntrt is aligned to a certain color, you have to understand the vibration of the color. All right. So I'm going to just quickly go through this because I think this will be really essential foundational information for us as we dive into like the longer course information in a few weeks. So the color red is typically associated with passion, with energy, with action. Red is a color of motivation. It is a color of war. It is a color of movement. It's interesting because we use red to say stop, but like it's stop signs and stoplights, but red actually is a color of action. Typically speaking, in terms of its spiritual vibration, it is it is a dancing flame. It is like passion and desire. It is lust, right? Red is like red of skin, you are fired up, you are frustrated, right? There is like movement in the color red, okay? And so where you see correspondence with the color red is you see red associated with Ntrw of war, such as Segmet, such as Mantu, such as Satesh. You see red associated with Ntrw of passion, such as Min, right? You see red associated with Ntrw that are about energy and action, such as Haru, right? So where you have those qualities, those attributes, that's where you're going to find the color red, right? The color orange is associated with momentum. So not quite as like oomph as red, but still movement, still action, still progress, right? The color orange is associated with success. And because the color orange is also associated with the sacral chakra, we also think about the color orange as being the color of unlocking potential and possibility, and also associated with our creative forces. So we think about the color orange. A lot of times we think about Haru, right? We also can think about Min. I mentioned Min a minute ago. Min is also a good Netr for the color orange. Haru is also a good Netr for the color orange, right? We think about momentum, we think about success, okay? These are the types of energies that you're going to see associated with the color orange. Yellow is a color of optimism, it's a color of luck, it's a color of confidence, right? Where you have Ntrw of confidence, I mentioned Haru before, you have Haru, you have Ra as well, Ntrw of confidence, Ntrw of luck and optimism. Yellow is also associated with the intellect. So it is a color of focus as well. It is a color of study. It is a color of mental acuity, right? So you'll also see yellow sometimes associated with Jehudi. You'll see yellow associated with Seshat sometimes. You'll see yellow associated with Impu at times as well, because of its connection to the air element and connection to the intellect, okay? Green is a color of growth and prosperity. And so green, we know, is associated with the Netar Asar. When we talk about Asar's regenerative qualities, we often point to his green skin and the color green. We also think about Geb with green. We think about Ta'ort, the great earth, being green. And we also think about health. When we see the color green, we think about wealth. When we see the color green, we think about money. Okay, when we see the color green, all right. And so we think about Ntrw that represent health and Ntrw that represent wealth when we think about the color green. Those are the Ntrw that will be associated with green. The color blue or indigo is a color of peace. It is a color of healing, of intuition, and of inspiration. So the color blue, that association with the vibration of peace is a big reason why blue is said to associate with the energy of Maat, right? And that association with the intuition is a big reason why the color blue is also associated with the energy of Aset. The color blue is also, I mentioned inspiration as well, like ideas and new thoughts coming in. So you have energies like Neferatum will also make sense to be associated with the color blue. Okay. Um, the color purple or violet is said to be associated with psychic power, with wisdom, and with spiritual awakening. All right. And so the color purple in the crown chakra, in the chakra system, excuse me, is associated with the crown chakra. And so it very much symbolizes our connections to the heavens, right? And so the work that we're doing to be connected to the divine forces, to be connected to the heavenly bodies, right? The work that we do to be spiritually awake and spiritually alive, that is represented by that purple or violet color. We also think about royalty when we think about purple, right? We think about royalty, we think about divinity, we think things that are regal, all right? So purple is associated with Jehudi a lot of times. We think about wisdom when we think about Jehudi. We think about spiritual awakening when we think about Jehudi. But these qualities also can apply to like Aset as well. These qualities can apply to Ptah as well. So we see purple can apply to several different Ntrw as well. Black and white are typically not really considered colors per se, but for the purposes of thinking about their vibrations, we want to include them here. White is typically an indication of cleansing and blessing and healing. White is not really considered a color because white is actually the reflection of light rather than like the presence of a specific color itself. And so in that way, white as is considered to be a really universal color, an energizing color, something that can apply to all the Netaru. Like if you don't know what color to use when you're invoking a particular Netaru, if you haven't yet got enough information about that Netaru to say, I think they vibrate with this color, or I think this color makes the most sense to work with them, then white is typically the color that you are going to want to go with. It is considered the most universal hue for spiritual purposes, right? Black, right, is considered to be a color of protection. Okay, it is a color for creating boundaries around yourself to banish negativity, right? And also, I actually, when I used to do the International African Arts Festival, after doing readings for several days, I would want to like protect my energy for the next couple days after that. I would want to like re-energize myself by absorbing light instead of like reflecting light back out. I don't want to reflect anything back out. I want to receive. I need to take in, right? I need to supercharge. So I'm wearing black, right, to give myself the opportunity to absorb, right, from nature, from the sun, so I can recharge, right? And so black is considered a protective, shielding color, right? And so, again, where you might want to use the color black is where you're doing protection work, where you're doing banishing work, where you're doing work around strengthening or affirming your boundaries. So this could be like working with Sitesh, right? This could be like working with some of the other Netaru that are really strict around boundaries and things like that. All right. Pink is said to be the color of love and friendship and sweetness. Very different from the color red because red is about passion. I talked about like lust and romance with red, right? Pink is more like universal love. Like I love my brothers. I love my sisters. I love Black people, right? Pink is considered a color that is about compassion for others, sweetness towards others, right? Goodness for others, okay? And then lastly, the color brown, which is associated with like grounding and supportive energy and the energy of like practicality, like the setting up the structure of a house, setting up the foundation of things, making sure budgets are in order, making sure everything is in its place. That's what the color of brown represents. That's the spiritual vibration of the color brown. Okay. So again, um, even now, as I'm sharing this, I'm still only mentioning just a few Ntrw, right? There are so many Ntrw. And as we think about colors that we are using to work with them, we are thinking about these vibrations that align with each color and how these vibrations help us to get closer to work to the vibration and the energy of that Netzer, right? If I'm working with Aset, how does wearing blue help me to be closer to her energy? What parts of her energy and what parts of her personality, what parts of her attributes am I activating within myself when I wear the color blue? All right. That's what I want us to be thinking about. So, throughout the course of this series, we're going to talk about the heavenly body that governs each day. We're going to spend one session talking about each day. So, the very first session is going to be on Sunday. Session number two will be on Monday, and so forth for 7 sessions. We're going to talk about the heavenly body, and we're going to talk about the energies and the attributes that are associated with that planetary body. We'll talk about it from an astronomy perspective, like how does that heavenly body specifically move in the heavens? What does it look like in the heavens? How does it present itself? And then from that, how do we derive a metaphysical or spiritual meaning based off of our observances of the heavenly body? Okay. Then we'll also talk about how you are going to maximize your work on that day. Now that you understand the energy of that cosmic body, how do you align yourself with that vibration so that you can better achieve your own personal goals? Like, how do you, invoke these energies? How do you move in harmony with these energies? Again, to co-create your reality on that day. We're also going to talk about Ntrw that align to these attributes and planets. We're going to focus on 2 Ntrw for each day. Although, in all honesty, for some days there are definitely more than two that we could cover, but we're going to focus on two so that you guys have really full and well-rounded perspectives about those Ntrw. Because again, the more information that you guys have, then the more focused and like laser beam you can make your spiritual work. And the more you can really align yourself with and more confidently invoke the Netaru, right? By understanding their qualities, their stories, their lessons, and then thinking about the colors that align to them, the crystals, the scents, the offerings, etc. So this is what we'll talk about for each day. And so, how you're going to use this information, you're going to be able to open every single day with prayers, with affirmations, with journal questions, journal works, with goal setting intentions that align specifically with the energy of the day. One of the earliest ways that I was taught about how to use the days of the week is by thinking about what your goal is, like your big, broad goal, and then narrowing that down specifically to what do I need to accomplish today, and how can the energy of the day for today help me to accomplish today's specific task. And so once you understand the energy of the day better, right, then you'll be able to actually answer that question and set goals that are going to help you to harmonize your goal with the goal, the energy of the day. All right. You'll be able to better understand which Netaru to invoke during which cycles, because again, we're going to focus on 2 Netaru for each day. And so there are going to be times where you're going to want to talk about Het Haru more on a Friday. And then other times where you're going to need to invoke Min more, and you're going to need to align yourself to Min's energy more on a Friday. And you need to know the difference about like why on a Friday would you invoke Het Haru versus why on a Friday would you invoke Min. You want to know the difference between the two. They're both associated with Friday, but they're not the same. And those nuances are really crucial to helping us to maximize our spiritual work. So I believe this expanded perspective on how you guys can harmonize the energy of the day is really going to enhance and support the intentional spiritual work that y'all are doing. Okay. So The course is going to start on Monday, September 14th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to run weekly for 7 sessions from that point forward. The investment is $450, and you guys can visit embahra today to register in a single transaction. And for anyone who would like to or needs to split the investment into 2 or 3 installments, you can do so using Cash App, Zelle, or PayPal. I really feel like this course is super crucial for anyone who has found themselves falling flat with their daily practice. Magic doesn't respond to empty ritual. Like magic does not respond to us doing things out of habit or doing things because we were told we're supposed to. Magic responds to intention and emotion. And the more we know about why this works for us and how this is supposed to work for us, then the more motivated we are to stay consistent with this work and then also to do this work well, right? To apply ourselves well to this understanding and to harness it for our benefit. And so the more well-rounded our practice is, the more benefit we're going to see from our practice, right? It's really difficult. I started talking about and teaching about the Ntrw years ago because it was really difficult to see people struggle with doing things, right? And then thinking like, why is what I'm doing not working? Am I not doing enough? Am I not good enough? Do I not know enough? Am I doing it wrong? And a lot of times, especially like directing that criticism or like the feeling that they're doing something wrong inward. And sometimes you're not doing anything wrong. Sometimes you just need to know more in order to like make it make sense. Because once it makes sense and it clicks, then that opens up a whole range of connection and clarity that takes your practice to a whole other level. Because again, magic and spiritual practice responds to our intention, it responds to our emotion. And so the more that we feel connected to this, the more that we understand why we're doing it instead of just doing it because someone said we should, then the more that we can actually put ourselves into it and the more benefits we're going to reap from the practice. Okay. Um, that's all I wanted to chat about tonight. I'm going to take a moment to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
I don't have any questions.
I have a thought.
So,
Um, I was just thinking how this, I didn't remember or hear, um, I thought this was going to be a class about, mainly and only the Ntrw of, the days of the week and the Ntrw. But when you put up the slide about how we will use this information daily, um, that's exactly what I need because even though I know who some of the Ntrw are, I don't study enough every day because of life. I work, and I don't want my I don't want my focus to mainly be on my work, and that it happens to that is natural for it to come up because that's all I'm really doing. There's we have our temple meetings or our rituals and our ceremonies, but I want something that I can do every day. And I was just, um, meditating on that, like, okay, what can I do? Because there's some things coming up in my life that I need to stay focused. So, um, I thought my thought was this is going to be really helpful for me.
upset. I'm very much looking forward to having you join the course, and I know that you'll get from it exactly what you need.
Mhm.
Yeah. Dua Sheps Ranu, Dua Shepset Mary, and Sunu for your comments in the chat. I also am looking forward to um I'm also looking forward to presenting this information. Actually, I should shout you out, Shepset Mary, because you were one of the group of sisters that came to me with some of the concerns and the questions that sparked this exploration in the first place. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity to help you and help everyone else to enhance their spiritual practice. So if there are no other questions, then Dua, we're all set for the evening. Again, you guys can go to my website to register today. And if anybody has a question that they didn't feel comfortable answering here, feel free to message me separately. All right. Shalom Atat.
Hmt Ntrt.
Remember to
Hmt Ntrt.